This November, Colorado voters may be asked to vote on a proposal that would allow the state to keep excess tax revenue in order to fund higher education, K-12 schools, and transportation projects. The proposal would not officially amend the Taxpayer's Bill of Rights, and because it is not a constitutional question, would only need a simple majority in the November 2019 election. Patty, is this an official de-Brucing statewide 27 years after Tabor was passed in 1992?
Can you believe it's been 27 years? I don't even think Colorado Inside Out was on yet. You know, we just started talking about it afterwards. But in 1992, we voted on the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. It was approved and surprised many people. And of course, the Amendment B that made us the hate state. So we had a couple really bellwether votes that year. The hate state appellation went down, Supreme Court struck it out, and here we are, though, still talking about Tabor. Over the years, I mean, Tabor allows you, voters, to decide whether they want to de-Bruce, and 51 of the 64 counties have done so. I think it's 271 out of 284 municipalities have done it. There have been a lot of opportunities for voters to make decisions, and I think that's great. That has worked. The problem we still have with Tabor is you've got the cap, which is you can't have spending or revenues in the state beyond a certain formula with inflation plus population growth. And we're in a position now, although I'm sure David is about to disagree with me, where some things that need to be fixed in the infrastructure can't be fixed if you cannot use some of that revenue. So what we're talking about here is not adding a tax, but you would get rid of the refund, and instead the state would be able to keep that money on one vote and then would split it between higher education, K-12, and transportation, all areas where I think we could need the money.
David, we've long talked about Tabor on this program. I think folks know where you stand, but let's get into more of the detail on two fronts. One, the bill currently has a Republican co-sponsor. I don't know if his days are numbered in a political career. And then also, does this live up to, I guess, what he's talked about as asking the voters their permission, which is what Tabor has been all about from 1992 forward?
That's exactly right. Tabor is about informed consent. So under the Taxpayer's Bill of Rights, government spending can automatically, with no consent, grow at the rate of population growth plus inflation. If the government wants to grow faster than that, all they have to do is ask the voters for permission. And as Patty said, plenty of municipalities have said that that's fine with us, sometimes on a temporary basis, sometimes permanently. This would be a permanent end of consent in Colorado. It's you consent once, and then that's it. You'll never get asked again, no matter how fast government spending goes up. The promise, of course, is you'll get all these wonderful things like transportation and education. Well, we had that with something called Referendum C over a decade ago, where the voters created a 5-year increase in the cap, which massively increased government spending. And of course, all the promises were higher education, K through 12, things like that. Didn't happen that way. What the legislature did was it said, oh, we got all this money we promised for higher education, so we're going to cut our higher education regular spending and put this new money into it. And in fact, the things that were promised under Tabor grew slower. Promised under the Referendum C budget buster grew slower than lots of other things. So this is like Lucy and Charlie Brown in the football. Referendum C was a pack of lies that increased spending on other stuff much more than on what was promised. Guarantee you this will be the same, and I guarantee you will never get adequate highway funding in this state from this current administration unless there is a tax increase. They will simply not fund highways adequately unless the voters put more money raise their own tax rates.
Natasha, in 2018, Colorado elected a lot of Democrats to the state legislature, both in the Senate and the House. But they also voted fairly libertarian on ballot issues. It kind of seemed like that split ticket that Colorado is always known for was more about candidates versus issues. This being an issue, what do you think about its chances of passing if it does go to the voters this November?
If I could predict that, I probably wouldn't be at this table. If anyone could predict how Colorado's voters are going to take or stance on a tax issue, there's a little bit more historical precedent there, yes. But I think that with as much population change as we've seen in this state, I mean, we're talking about when Tabor was passed to the number of people who have moved in the state since then, who constantly ask that question of what is Tabor? How they never weighed in on that conversation of whether we should have this or not, but they constantly hear about it. I mean, it has to be one of the top 5 topics at this table, if not certainly the top 10. It is also something that you could probably put up an infographic every time it comes up. I mean, Patty did a great summary at the start of, okay, this is what it is, this is why you need to know it. It's something I deal with in stories as well, to constantly re-educate a new group of Coloradans who've come in who just don't have that background history. I don't think that this effort is a surprise to anyone who's watched Colorado politics for a while. It was going to be a topic in the campaigns, and as soon as the control shifted with the governor's office, the Senate, and the House all being there, that this was, of course, going to become an issue. But I do think it's important to have a statewide discussion on that, and if this is a good way to start that conversation, let's do that.
Ian, it seemed back in the Ref C, Ref D days, and Ref D failed, but Ref C passed, one of the necessary elements was that it came out as a bipartisan idea. Right. Governor Bill Owens was a part of it as a Republican governor, and Ref C still, I mean, it wasn't a landslide win, but it squeaked through. Is the one Republican co-sponsor right now enough to really sell this as a bipartisan idea?
Well, I'm certain that the sponsors would welcome any Republicans who want to join on to the fight here to try and increase funding for K-12, higher ed, and transportation. I mean, look, more than half of the schools in the state are on 4-day school weeks. Like, the roads are garbage. It took me 20 minutes to get here, and I'm 3 miles away from here, right? No one thinks that the problems that we have are being addressed right now, and people know that it takes additional revenue to do that. That's a simple fact. So I know the sponsors would welcome more conservatives. Unfortunately, you know, the moderate conservatives lost all their elections except Kevin Priola wasn't up this last time, so he's up in 2 years. It looks like he's trying to moderate for the upcoming election by signing on to something like this. You have to think, what's his political calculation? What is the #1 targeted senator in the chamber thinking when he goes, I'm going to sign on to this because I know my constituents want more funding for roads and schools, right? So you take all that together and, you know, it is bipartisan, right? I think that partisan political operatives want to make it seem like this is a big Democrat thing, but they're forgetting or willfully ignoring that the prime sponsor in the Senate is not only a Republican, but the one who's widely seen as the most in danger of losing election in the 2020 races. So, you know, at the end of the day, this thing I think is going to be a great conversation to have. I'm excited to have it. I think those of us on the left would like to go much further than a simple debrucing measure, and we should recognize that debruce is named for Doug Bruce, the convicted felon tax cheat who put Tabor into the Constitution to begin with after failing twice and succeeding once. So I think there's plenty of conversation to have here, but I know that there will be plenty of Republicans who are not elected officials and scared of primaries who will sign on to this because they know it's the right thing to do.